Her name was Lyra. She sat at the edge of the grand balcony of her family's palace, staring out into the stars. The palace was full of laughter, music, and the echoes of power, but for her, it all felt hollow. No matter how bright the stars were, they only reminded her how far away she was from everything she truly wanted. Lyra was different. She was small, so small that among her tall and mighty people, she seemed fragile, almost breakable. The nobles whispered that she was a mistake of birth. The warriors laughed that no mate would ever claim her. And the suitors who traveled from distant empires all ignored her, choosing instead her taller cousins, her stronger sisters, her more worthy kin. Every gathering ended the same way. She sat alone, dressed in gowns that seemed too heavy for her slight frame, smiling politely, as though the words of rejection did not wound her. But inside, her heart sank a little deeper each time. The galaxy was vast, and still, she had never found someone who looked at her as more than a weak curiosity. That evening, she stood in the shadow of a tall pillar as the palace ballroom filled with alien dignitaries. Music swirled in the air, strange instruments from across the stars. Colored light danced over crystal floors. Her sisters were surrounded by suitors who offered jewels, promises of alliances, and boasts of their strength. Kept to herself, she wanted to join in, to laugh and talk as freely as the others. But every time she stepped forward, the crowd seemed to shift away. Her small voice was drowned in their thunderous words. "Why do you stand alone, princess?" a voice asked. Once, years ago, she had thought someone cared. But when she turned, the noble male only smirked and added, "Perhaps you fear breaking beneath our steps." Then he walked away, leaving her face burning with shame. Since then, she had stopped trying. Lyra wandered outside into the night gardens. The stars above glittered, cold and beautiful, like distant jewels no one could ever touch. She wrapped her arms around herself. It was strange. She was surrounded by people, yet she felt more alone than ever. What was wrong with her? She whispered the question into the night. She had no answer. Deep in her heart, though, she carried a stubborn spark, a hope. She dreamed, even if quietly, that somewhere out there was someone who would see her, not her height, not her supposed weakness, not the cruel words others threw at her, but her. But as the years passed, that dream felt more and more like a childish fantasy. She thought about her childhood friend, a cousin who had once promised to always stay by her side. He had moved away long ago, chosen by another empire to marry into power. He had written once, then stopped. She had held on to those words for years, waiting for another letter that never came. That was the first time she had learned how easily she could be forgotten. Now she wondered if maybe she was destined to be forgotten forever. The palace bells rang, pulling her back to the present. Another suitor had arrived, one of many who came to seek an alliance. She could already guess what would happen. They would look at her sisters. They would laugh at her small frame. And she would stand invisible, her name fading into silence. She sighed. Her people were proud, and to them, strength meant size, dominance, power. No one admired patience. No one valued kindness. No one cared about listening. Her heart ached. She wanted someone to listen. As the night stretched on, Lyra's steps carried her back to the ballroom. She forced herself to stand tall, even though she was the smallest in the room. Around her, voices boomed. Suitors spoke of war fleets, of conquests, of empires that bent under their will. No one spoke of gentleness. No one spoke of dreams. She felt distant like a shadow on the wall of her own life. For a moment, she almost wished she could vanish into the stars, unseen forever. But that spark, that human-like stubbornness she carried, whispered in her heart, "Don't give up. Someone is out there. Someone will see you." And so she endured. Later, She returned to the balcony, where the stars seemed to whisper faintly, almost as if they carried secrets. She leaned forward on the railing. Closing her eyes, in the silence, she imagined another. Life one where someone walked up to her not because of politics, not because of her bloodline, but simply because they wanted to know who she was. She imagined laughter shared with someone who cared, a voice that would quiet the endless noise of rejection. It was a fragile hope. But it was hope she did not know yet that beyond the stars, a new guest had arrived in her empire. He was not tall, nor covered in armor, nor commanding with the arrogance of galactic nobility. He was human, and though she did not know it yet, the human's eyes would one day look at her differently then. All others had not with mockery, not with pity, but with choice. The palace lights burned brighter that night. A gala had been prepared in honor of new visitors from distant stars. The air smelled of rare flowers and crystal wine, the kind of luxuries that marked power and wealth. Lyra stood at the side of the hall, her hands clasped together as she tried to look calm. She had attended dozens of such galas, and each one carried the same story. She would stand quietly, she would be overlooked, and the weight of loneliness would grow a little heavier. But she came anyway. She told herself it was her duty. A princess should be seen, even if no one wanted to see her. The suitors arrived first. They were tall and strong, their voices booming like drums. Some wore armor polished with starlight. Others carried jewels that glowed with inner fire. They came with promises of power, fleets, and wealth. Not for her, never for her. The suitors gathered around her sisters and cousins, all of whom stood tall and radiant in their gowns. Lyra tried to smile when nobles glanced at her, but most simply looked past her as though she were part of the decorations. Once, one suitor's eyes fell on her. For a heartbeat, her chest lifted. But then he chuckled softly and turned away, his attention fixed on someone else. The sound stung like a blade. Lyra moved to the edge of the hall, near a tall column, hiding in its shadow. From there, she could watch without being seen. The music echoed around her, but it felt distant, hollow. She felt as though a wall stood between her and the rest of the galaxy. Her heart whispered of the friend she had once lost, the one who had moved away, a cousin who had sworn they would always remain close, who had once held her hand when the older children mocked her. She could still remember his words. "You are not small, Lyra. You are strong in ways they don't understand." But he was gone, moved to another world, married into another family. His last letter had grown cold and formal, and then silence followed. She often wondered if he ever thought of her, if she was still a memory, or if she had already vanished. From his mind, like a shadow in the morning sun, the noble's laughter pulled her back. They were boasting now, speaking of wars they had won and enemies they had crushed. She wondered if that was all that mattered: power, victory, dominance. Was there no one who cared for gentleness? She felt like a flower in a garden of stone. The weight of it pressed on her chest until she could no longer breathe the same air. She stepped out of the hall quietly, unnoticed, and made her way to the palace gardens. The gardens were silent under the starlit sky. Lyra walked slowly between glowing plants and silver fountains, her small steps making no sound on the polished stone paths. She sat by a pond, watching her reflection tremble in the water. It was a fragile reflection, delicate, tiny, easy to break. "Why am I never enough?" she whispered. No one answered. Only the night. Her throat tightened. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes. She wanted to reconnect with her lost friend, with her family, with anyone who might see her for who she truly was. But every time she tried, the distance grew wider. Words failed. Hearts grew colder. She did not know how to cross that space anymore. And yet, There was something inside her that refused to vanish. Hope. That stubborn, fragile ember dot, it whispered to her that somewhere in the vast galaxy, someone would hear her, someone would understand, someone would choose her. But how? How could she find them when she couldn't even reach the ones who had once cared for her? She sat for a long time in silence, asking herself questions with no answers. Behind her, footsteps sounded faintly on the path. She turned, expecting another noble who had wandered into the gardens. Instead, she saw a figure unlike the others. Shorter, thinner, dressed in simpler clothes. His eyes were bright, but not mocking. His presence felt different, not heavy with pride, but calm. A human. He walked slowly, as though he was unsure whether he should approach. He glanced at her, then at the stars, then back at her again. Lyra lowered her eyes. She expected him to pass without a word. That was what everyone did, but he didn't. He stopped a few steps away, cleared his throat softly, and said, "The stars are beautiful tonight." Lyra blinked. His voice was not booming like the others. It was gentle. Quiet. She hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, they are." It was the first time in years that someone had spoken to her first. Not out of duty, not out of mockery, but simply because they wanted to. Her heart stirred. He said nothing more, only stood there, gazing at the sky. The silence between them was not heavy like it was with the others. It was light, comfortable. For the first time in so long, Lyra felt as though the wall between her and another had thinned, just a little. She dared to hope. She did not yet know his name. She did not yet know why he was here, or what fate would weave from this moment. Princess Lyra stood in the garden with the human. The night air was cool, carrying the soft scent of starlight flowers. She had spoken only a single word to him, and yet her heart was racing faster than it had in years. He didn't speak like the others. He didn't fill the air with boasts or laughter at her expense. He simply stood there, calm, watching the stars as though they were enough. Lyra wanted to say something more. She wanted to ask him why he was there, why he had chosen this quiet corner instead of the grand hall. She wanted to ask if he even knew who she was, but the words caught in her throat. So she stayed silent. After a while, the human looked at her. Again, his eyes were steady, not mocking, not pitying, just steady. He smiled softly. "I'm Daniel," he said. The name was simple. It carried no titles, no weight of power. Just a name. Lyra blinked. No one had ever introduced themselves to her like that. Nobles usually began with their rank, their fleets, their riches. They spoke of themselves as if they were already gifts to be accepted, but this human had only offered his name. "Lyra," she whispered, unsure if he even knew she was a princess. Daniel nodded. "It's a good name." Her chest tightened. "Number." One had ever said that before. They stood in silence again, but this time the silence felt warmer. The stars above seemed closer somehow, less cold. At last, Daniel said, "You don't seem very happy in there." He nodded toward the palace, where music still echoed faintly. Lyra lowered her eyes. It is not a place for me." "Why not?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to say everything, that she was always overlooked, that no one saw her, that she felt distant even in her own family. She wanted to say she was tired of being small, of being forgotten, but the words felt dangerous. If she spoke them, maybe he would laugh, just like the others. "I do not belong," she finally said. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I know that feeling." Her eyes lifted sharply. "You?" He smiled faintly. "Back on Earth, I wasn't exactly the strongest. Not the tallest, not the fastest. People overlooked me too. Sometimes they forgot I was even there. But I learned something. Lyra's breath caught. What? That the ones who overlook you aren't the ones who matter. She stared at him, her heart trembling. Could it really be that simple? Could it really be that those who mocked her were not the ones worth caring about? But if that was true, then why did it still hurt so much? Her eyes filled with unshed tears. But what if the ones who mattered left me? Daniel tilted his head, listening carefully. His expression did not change into boredom or mockery, as others did when she spoke too softly. He simply waited. I had a friend once, she whispered. Someone who promised to stay, but he moved away. He forgot me. I thought I would always have him. And when he left, I realized maybe no one would ever stay. The words tumbled out, weak and broken. Daniel's gaze softened. That must have hurt. She nodded silently, her throat too tight to speak. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The night stretched around them, the stars gleaming above. Lyra expected the silence to grow heavy, but it didn't. It felt gentle. Finally, Daniel said quietly, maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he just didn't know how to come back. Lyra blinked. She had never thought of that before. Daniel looked at the stars. Sometimes distance makes people afraid. Afraid that if they reach out, the other person won't answer. So they stay silent. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to reconnect. Her heart tightened. His words felt like they had been pulled from her own soul. Was that how her lost friend had felt? Was that why he never returned? And if so, did that mean she was not truly forgotten? Hope flickered faintly in her chest. She looked at Daniel, this human with quiet eyes and simple words, and wondered how someone so far from her world could understand her better than those who had lived beside her all her life. For the first time, she felt less alone. When the palace bells rang again, summoning them back to the gala, Lyra felt a pang of fear. What if this moment ended? What if she returned to the hall and Daniel disappeared into the crowd, just like everyone else? But then Daniel glanced at her, gave her a small reassuring nod, and said, "Come on. You don't have to stand alone anymore." Her breath caught. He had no idea what those words meant to her. She rose slowly, her heart still trembling, and followed him back toward the hall. Inside, the nobles still boasted. The suitors still laughed. Nothing had changed in the palace, but something had changed. In her, for the first time in her life, someone had listened. Someone had not mocked. Someone had understood. And though she still felt distant, though sadness still weighed on her, hope now glowed faintly inside her heart, because perhaps, just perhaps, she was not as alone as she thought. Asterisk the music inside. The palace swelled louder as Lyra and Daniel stepped back into the hall. Bright lights glittered off jewels, off armor, off faces full of pride and arrogance. It was the same as before, except that now, Lyra was not standing alone. Daniel walked beside her, unhurried, not trying to push his way into the crowd, not trying to prove anything. He simply stayed near her, as though her presence mattered enough. And for Lyra, that changed everything. But as they entered, her doubts returned. Would he stay? Or would he, like everyone else, drift away as soon as someone taller, stronger, more beautiful caught his eye? Her heart trembled with fear. She wanted to reach out, to say something that would hold this fragile connection together, but the words stayed trapped inside her. She had once trusted someone before, and he had moved away. She had once opened her heart, and it had been left behind. What if this human did the same? Daniel glanced at her, noticing her silence. His smile was calm. "You don't like this place very much, do you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "It does not like me." His brow furrowed slightly, as though he couldn't understand why. "Why wouldn't it?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Because I am small." Because I am weak. Because I am not enough. Her voice faltered. Those words had been spoken about her so often that part of her had begun to believe them. But Daniel's eyes sharpened. Who told you that? Lyra blinked at him. Everyone. Then everyone is wrong. The certainty in his voice startled her. It was not loud or forceful, but it was steady, like stone that could not be moved. No one else sees me this way, she whispered. Then they don't know how to see, Daniel replied. Back on Earth, strength isn't just about size. Sometimes the smallest people carry the greatest weight. Sometimes the quietest voices say the most important things. Lyra's breath caught. She wanted to believe him. Truly she did. But the years of rejection wrapped around her heart like chains. She lowered her gaze. But I have lost so many. Even the ones who cared once. Left me. Daniel's voice softened. I know what that feels like. Her eyes lifted. He looked out toward the great windows where the stars shone beyond. I lost people too. Friends, family. Some moved away. Some I'll never see again. For a long time, I felt like I didn't matter. But then I realized connections don't die just because of distance. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they come back when you least expect them. Lyra's heart ached with both sadness and hope. Could it be true? Could distance mean something other than being forgotten? She wanted to ask him to stay. She wanted to beg him not to vanish like the others. But her pride, her fear, held her back, and yet, for the first time, she felt as though maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to beg. Maybe he would stay because he wanted to Dot as the night wore on. Lyra and Daniel stepped away from the hall again, returning to the balcony where the stars shone brightly. She felt safer here, away from the noise, with only him and the sky above. Daniel leaned against the railing, looking thoughtful. You know, he said, humans have a saying. It's not the size of the person in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the person. Lyra tilted her head. What does it mean? He smiled. It means strength isn't about how big you are. It's about how much heart you have. How much you're willing to stand, even when everyone else pushes you down. Her breath caught. No one in her life had ever spoken of her heart before. No one had ever suggested that her courage mattered more than her size. But Daniel did. And in his words, she felt something bloom inside her that she thought had died long ago. Hope. She whispered, almost too softly for him to hear. Do you really think someone like me could matter? Daniel turned to her, his eyes steady. I don't just think it. I know it. Her throat tightened. She looked away quickly, blinking back tears. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want him to see how much those words meant. But he didn't laugh at her silence. He didn't push her for more. He just stood there, beside her, letting her breathe. And in that quiet, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt equal. The night grew late. The gala began to fade, nobles drifting back to their chambers. Lyra and Daniel remained on the balcony until the stars dimmed against the rising light of dawn. When she finally turned to go, Daniel walked with her, not behind her, not ahead of her, but beside her. And though the distance between her and her people still ached, though her old friends still lived far away, though sadness still lingered in her heart, she no longer felt quite as lost, because now someone saw her. For a few days after the gala, Lyra carried something she had not felt in years: lightness. It was fragile, like a flame flickering in the wind, but it warmed her heart. Daniel had stayed. He walked with her in the gardens. He listened to her. When she spoke, even when her words were soft, he told her stories of earth, of oceans that stretched endlessly, of forests that whispered in the wind, of skies that burned red and gold when the sun set. No one in her empire had ever shared stories with her like that. No one had ever cared enough to make her laugh, to make her dream. For the first time, the distance between her and another being seemed to shrink. But the distance between her and her people only grew. The whispers began quietly. She lingers. With the human too often. Does she not know it is shameful? She was spurned by all of us, and now she clings to the first creature who looks at her. The word spread like smoke through the halls. Everywhere Lyra walked, she felt eyes. On her, some were curious. Some were mocking. Some were cruel. Her sisters smirked. Her cousins laughed. Even the nobles who once ignored her now looked at her with disdain. She lowers herself, they said. A princess who cannot win the respect of her own kind, finding comfort in a fragile outsider. The words cut deep. Lyra tried to hide it from Daniel. She smiled when he told stories. She laughed when he teased gently. But inside, her chest was heavy. What if he heard the whispers? What if he grew ashamed of her? What if he left? She remembered the friend who had moved away, the silence that followed, the way her heart had broken. She feared it would happen again. One evening, they entered the great hall together. The nobles were gathered, their tall frames towering, their voices loud. Lyra tried to walk quietly, hoping no one would notice, but someone did. Look! A noble male shouted, his voice dripping with laughter. The tiny princess has found pet to keep her company. The hall erupted in cruel chuckles. Lyra froze. Her heart dropped. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to vanish, to run back into the gardens, to escape the sting of those words. But before she could move, Daniel stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not boast. But his voice carried, clear and firm. She is no one's pet. The laughter faltered. Daniel's eyes swept the hall. Where I come from, respect is not measured in size or strength. It is measured in how you treat others. And from where I stand, not one of you deserves to call her weak. The silence that followed was heavy. The nobles stared at him, shocked. That a human small, fragile by their standards, had dared to speak so boldly. Lyra's chest tightened. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever stood before the whole court and declared she was worthy. Her throat burned with unshed tears. The noble who had mocked her sneered. And who are you, human, to speak in our hall? Daniel's gaze did not waver. I am someone who sees what you refuse to, that she has more courage in her heart than all of your words combined. Lyra gasped softly. The hall erupted into murmurs. Some were angry. Some were surprised. A few, very few, looked thoughtful. But Lyra only saw him. When the gathering ended, she slipped out quickly, her emotions too heavy to contain. She found herself once again on the balcony, staring out at the stars. Her heart was torn. She felt distant from her people, more than ever. Their rejection had only deepened. Their whispers had only grown crueler, but she also felt closer to Daniel than she had ever felt to anyone. He had not been ashamed. He had not left. He had chosen to stand. When Daniel joined her on the balcony, she turned to him, her eyes shimmering. Why did you do that? He looked at her as though the question itself was strange. Because it was right. Her voice shook. But they will mock you now too, so let them. His tone was calm, steady. Their mockery doesn't change who I am, and it doesn't change who you are. Lyra's throat tightened. You don't understand. No one has ever stood for me. Daniel's eyes softened. Then they were blind. Because I see you. The words broke something inside her. Tears spilled, and she quickly turned her face away, ashamed of them. But Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't turn away. He simply stood beside her, letting her cry quietly into the night. And in that silence, she felt the distance inside her heart begin to shrink. The stars above shone like witnesses, eternal and bright. Lyra lifted her eyes to them, her heart trembling with both pain and hope. For though she was still spurned by her people, still mocked and rejected, she was not alone. Someone had chosen her, and that choice mattered more than all the whispers. In the galaxy ***, the days after Daniel's defiance were strange ones. For Lyra, there was warmth in her chest whenever she remembered the way he had stood tall in the hall, unshaken even as hundreds of eyes turned against him. That memory was a spark of light she carried everywhere, but around her the shadows grew darker. Her people whispered more fiercely now. They called her foolish. They said she was blinded by the first kind glance she had ever received. They mocked Daniel, calling him weak, calling him unworthy. Lyra told herself their words didn't matter. But when she walked through the palace, when she saw her sister's scornful smiles, the weight on her heart returned. The distance was growing, not between her and Daniel, but between her and her world. One night, she sat in the gardens, hugging her knees against her chest. The stars above felt cold, the silence heavy. She remembered the friend she had once had long ago, the one who had moved away. At first, they had sent letters, small messages of kindness. But over time, the letters stopped. The silence had stretched, until it became permanent. That loss had hurt her deeply. And now, even though Daniel was here, even though he had promised with his actions that he saw her worth, Lyra feared the same ending. What if he too, one day turned distant? What if he grew tired of standing alone against her people? What if he left her behind like all the others? The thought twisted inside her chest until tears blurred her eyes. Daniel found her there, sitting in the cool night air. He crouched down beside her. "You're crying again," he said softly. Lyra quickly wiped her face. I don't mean to. She couldn't finish. He sat down next to her. "You're afraid?" Her throat tightened. She nodded slowly. "Afraid I'll leave?" He asked gently. The words broke her heart, because they were true. She whispered, "Everyone leaves?" Daniel was quiet for a while. Then he leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Back on Earth," he began, "I had a friend. We grew up together, always side by side. Then one day, her family moved far away. I thought I'd never see her again. For years, I felt that distance. It was like carrying an ache I couldn't fix." Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide. He smiled faintly. "But one day, I found her again. I searched, even when it seemed impossible. And when we met again, the years melted away like they were nothing." His voice was steady, filled with a quiet strength. Humans don't give up on the ones they care about. Distance doesn't end us. It just makes us fight harder to reconnect. The words struck Lyra's heart like a flame. She had always believed distance meant loss. That once someone moved away, whether to another world or to another heart, there was no way back. But Daniel was telling her something different. He was telling her that hope could last, that bonds could be rebuilt, that distance was not the end. Her eyes stung, but this time not with sorrow. You searched for her, even after so long?" He nodded. "Because she mattered, just like you matter." For a moment, the gardens were silent, except for the whisper of leaves in the night breeze. Then Lyra whispered, "But I am still alone among my people. They do not want me." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. "Then we'll show them. Not with anger, not with fear, but with proof that you are stronger than they realize." Her chest trembled. "How?" "By not giving up," he said simply. "That's what humans do best. We keep walking forward, no matter the distance." The words stayed with her long after he left her side that night. Lyra lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her chamber. She thought of her people, of the way they turned their backs on her. She thought of the friend who had once moved away. She thought of Daniel, who had chosen her despite it all. And for the first time, she began to wonder, what if she could change things? What if she didn't have to remain distant forever? The next morning, she walked into the hall, not with her head lowered, but with her chin lifted. Her heart still pounded, fear still lingered, but she carried Daniel's words with her like armor. She greeted those who mocked her. She offered kindness where they offered scorn. She spoke when she would have stayed silent. The nobles still whispered. The laughter still stung. But Lyra felt something different inside her now. A quiet strength. A seed of hope. Because one human had shown her that she was not bound to rejection. Because one human had reminded her that distance could be crossed. That night, she returned to the gardens and told Daniel what she had done. He grinned. That's the spirit. Keep going, and one day they'll see you for who you are. Her heart warmed at his words, and though the distance between her and her people still stretched wide, she no longer felt hopeless. Because she had learned something new. Distance was not the end of love, nor of respect, nor of belonging. It was only a challenge, and she would meet